Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 2023 forecast. I'm Gary O'Toole. You can find me at timelineastrology.com. So before we begin, let's chant for Ganesh to help us clear our mind. Om Gang Ganapatiye Namah. Om Gang Ganapatiye Namah. Om Gang Ganapatiye Namah. So a reminder that I use the sidereal calculations, the star signs, as opposed to the tropical zodiac. And so this is likely to shift signs for you. If you were born at a certain time up until more recent years, that means 23 degrees of a difference most often. So you have to then move everything back 23 degrees, which most often means it moves to the previous sign. Also, I want to remind you that your location obviously has a big impact on any of these transits, and the transits themselves, although we all experience all of the transits on some level in some way, there are some transits that are going to be more impactful based on our own unique circumstances. So the word in Vedic astrology is dasha. Dasha is basically to mean how we look at what is triggered in your chart, whether it's sign dasha, the sign progression, planetary cycles, also what signs and what planets are active. So keep an eye, a special close eye on the planet that is active in your current cycles. This is very easy information to find online. If you put in dasha into a search, you'll find the Vimshotri in particular is a 120-year lifespan. We divide up between the 9 grahas or planets. So let's get into the transits for April 2023, remembering that this is sidereal signs. Mars is in Gemini from mid-March until mid-May. And although that is a better situation in many ways because it was stuck in the mud in Taurus for many, many months, it's now moving on past its shadow by mid-March and into April. It's moving on into new territory, at least. And then we have this interesting dynamic going on where, although Mars in Gemini is not necessarily its favorite sign because it's all about thinking and rationalizing, and Mars is not about those things. Gemini likes to debate things. Mars likes to take action. So they don't really mix well together, and it can create too many debates, of course, and arguments, unnecessary debates. So choose your battles wisely, I would say. But what's going on, though, is that Mercury is moving into Aries by the 31st of March. And so throughout that period, because Mercury is going to retrograde in Aries, it will stay longer in Aries, therefore, until June 7th. Between the 31st of March and May 10th, therefore, Mars and Mercury are exchanging signs because Mars rules Aries. So we have this interesting dynamic and negotiation now that is going on between two planets that don't normally get along, and they're almost having to get along, like being forced to get along. So for some signs, that's going to be easier than others. For some signs, that might be challenged, but overcome the challenge and come out on top. It depends on your sign. So I'm going to do the usual monthly sign-based forecast if you keep an eye out for that. At any rate, just generally, this is a time where we could find more negotiations at a time that negotiations are absolutely crucial. This is a crucial time, as we'll see with the other transits, in terms of the war situation, in terms of the economy as well, in terms of business, all of those things. Mars, Mercury. So Mercury itself is going to retrograde. I've highlighted here, I've put all these retrogrades in for the year, and I've highlighted the April into May one. So it's from April 21st until May 15th. And that's a real crucial time as well, April 21st, because we have an eclipse the day before, a total solar eclipse in Aries. We have Jupiter move into Aries on the day that Mercury stations retrograde. We then have Jupiter station at the degree Mercury is going to station later on in the year, and actually station direct at the degree Mercury is going to station direct. So let me just highlight here just this again. From April 21st to May 15th, Mercury retrograde in Aries, mixed in with all of the eclipse and all of that. And on top of that, Jupiter will later on in the year, and for actually the rest of the year, from the summer until the very end of the year, we see Jupiter retrograde through these exact degrees, from 21 degrees back to 11 degrees of Aries. That suggests to me that this Mercury retrograde, the eclipse and everything that's happening in April, May is suggesting that's part of the financial meltdown later on. So I'll talk more about that in a while, but this is a crucial period we're heading into for sure. So this is Jupiter moving into Aries from April 21st this year until May 1st next year. And so ordinarily we would say, okay, Jupiter in Aries, it's not in its sign Pisces anymore, but that might be a good thing in one way because it was hemmed in Pisces between Saturn and Rahu. Saturn in Aquarius now, Rahu in Aries. So it's out of that sort of hemming in process at least. But the thing is, and the problem here is that Jupiter in Aries, while good for taking like inspired action, we might say that's a good phrase for Jupiter in Aries. The thing here is that it's going to conjoin with Rahu and exact by the end of May this year. And this is what I'm calling a black swan event. This is literally a black swan. I took this photo in Galway in 2017 when a black swan literally came into Galway. And it was just quite a sight to behold at a time in, the world where, well, we already saw a lot of black swan events. Let me remind you that the last time Jupiter and Rahu came together was in 2016. And that is when we saw Donald Trump elected as president of the US. We saw the UK vote to leave the EU. We saw the Brexit vote. And we're just seeing the repercussions of these things now. So Jupiter is coming together with Rahu, the North Node, again. This is the first time since 2016, this time in the sign Aries, the sign of war. So we're likely to see another black swan event. And what does a black swan event mean? Well, basically, it's a theory that, these are things that we cannot predict, quote unquote, that they're just outliers. They're just something that you cannot predict, but in hindsight, then you can make a rationale for. But with astrology, of course, we can predict that. At least we know that something shocking, something disturbing, something very divisive is going to happen. Because what happens when Jupiter, the planet of righteousness and knowing what is the right thing to do, joins with the North Node, the shadow of the eclipse, Rahu, during a time we're having an eclipse in Aries and a Mercury retrograde on top of that, it just creates a lot of confusion and a lot of smoke and mirrors, and we're just not going to be 100% sure about what's going on, and it could be a very shocking event that happens as well. I'll talk more about that in other videos, but let's move on through April. Let's look at the moons, the full and new moons. The full moon is on April 6th. It's in Hasta, the lunar mansion in Sidereal Virgo. And then we have a new moon, and this is the total solar eclipse. This is a really important solar eclipse in April. It's in Aśvinī. This is the lunar mansion in the beginning of Sidereal Aries on April 20th, a total solar eclipse. This has a lot in common with, and this whole period has a lot in common with 1929. So I've been going on about this for some time. I do believe that we are going to see a financial meltdown. I'm hoping that it's not like that to that degree. I'm hoping, and I'll show you some transits that might suggest that it's contained somewhat, but that there is going to be a meltdown. And hoping also that there might be something that can come in its place. Now, that might be the centralized digital currency. I don't know. I'm not an economist, but I know that with the astrology of 2023, it's too similar to the astrology of 1929. And throughout the year, it's too similar. There are too many patterns repeating over and over again for something not to happen in a way. But anyway, back to the full moon first, and we'll look at that before we get to the eclipse. It's a full moon in Virgo, Sidereal Virgo. So Pisces obviously is activated with the sun. Jupiter is coming to the end of its transit in Pisces. And, that is in itself where Jupiter slips behind the sun. We can't see the sun through because of the rays, or we can't see the Venus because of the rays of the sun. So we can't see, back up again. We can't see Jupiter because of the rays of the sun. So when we can't see a planet, we can't see the outer significations very obviously. And Jupiter represents growth. And we can't see that. We can't see a way forward even. We don't know what to do. We're not clear about what we're doing, and we don't make the right decisions necessarily. Now, we do make the right decisions in other ways, you might say, from a larger perspective. But it might seem like things aren't very clear right now to you. And The only thing we can do, and that's the strength of a combust planet when it's hidden by the sun, is to move within and to look within. And Jupiter represents, from that perspective, an inner intelligence, at any rate, an intuition. So it's about getting clear about something without looking out there for the answers. Because after Jupiter has come out of this combustion and then moves into Aries and conjoins the North Node and gets eclipsed in a way and creates this shadow over what is right, even, we really do have to look within for the answers. And if we're looking without to other people who are supposed to give us advice, well, we might not get that advice if we haven't first found that truth within ourselves. The answer has to be found within ourselves first. So that's the key thing here. And even though I'm mentioning this now because it's a full moon opposite, this is like we're now pivoting into this whole period of confusion, of changes, maybe even shocking events. So use this full moon, in other words, to get things organized, to do some practical things, because that's what Virgo's good at. And this is the lunar mansion Hasta, which is the best, one of the best lunar mansions and days. That's April 6th, remember, to get organized and to do as much as you can. Now, at the same time, obviously, you have to balance that with the Piscean urge to just let go and let things be as they are. And they're always meant to be, you know, and to see that kind of higher on up perspective. So it's quite a pivotal time in many ways because of that. So that's the full moon. Then a couple of weeks later, then we have this new moon and a real important reset. Again, this reflects a lot about what was going on in 1929, but at any rate, and even the fact that actually this physically on the planet, this eclipse is visible in the same region in the Far East and down to Australia, just like it was in 1929. It's like visible in the same region. So at any rate, this is at 5 degrees of Sidereal Aries. It's a new moon and it's a total solar eclipse because it's close enough to the North Node Rahu in Aries. And this is the 20th, the day before Mercury itself is stationing. So pretty much Mercury's not moving anywhere. It's very closely conjunct Uranus. That's adding another element of surprise. This 5 degree obviously is very sensitive, but it already has been activated by Mercury. And actually around the full moon on the 6th of April, Mercury transits this eclipse degree, 5 degrees. Jupiter will then transit it later on into the end of April and beginning of, more so the beginning of May. And so we're definitely having activations straight off the bat, really, with this new moon and total solar eclipse. And Aśvinī, the first lunar mansion of the zodiac, is very impulsive. It's sort of like out of the gates before you even think about it. And, you know, there could be some things happening at this point, you know, in April overall. But it also is a time, obviously, to be very reflective on what we need to make happen, what we need to do. So personally, I would say this is a great time on April 20th to be really still and to, you know, set some intentions and to be very clear about those. And it's important, therefore, to be really still because it might not be very clear outwardly what to do. Again, you might not be getting the advice, the right advice, because what is Jupiter doing? It's right in between signs, Pisces and Aries. And usually we would say during an eclipse to look to Jupiter to get that clarity about what to do, to know what is right. And Jupiter is just sort of at a loss right now. It's not only combust. We can't physically see Jupiter, but it is transiting from Pisces to Aries, which is itself a very volatile juncture in the zodiac because there's no sort of overlapping lunar mansion here. It's kind of like a void in the zodiac. And so there is this sense again, and actually this is where Venus moved over during the banking collapse recently. The Silicon Valley Bank collapse. Venus was moving through here. Now we have Jupiter moving through here. So apart from the financial setup that I think this is going to bring and the subsequent inflation sort of situation and also the kind of ballooning situation, the bubble that's going to be created from the Jupiter and Rahu thing, some sort of rescue package maybe that creates an inflated situation that then actually leads to the crash later on in the year, especially by October, November. We might have crashes before then, mini crashes maybe. And it's just, again, highlighting the similarities between this year and 1929 are just stark, you know. But we have Venus going retrograde between Cancer and Leo later on in the summer, for example, before it moves into Virgo. Mars meeting Ketu, the South Node in Libra, just as it was in 1929. And then Venus meeting Ketu in Virgo in its debilitation by November. It's just one thing after another, really, that suggests this kind of meltdown later on. And it could be what happens now that sets the stage for that. So that's something to be really mindful of. This eclipse is important. Now, that's just the economy. But what about the other thing that's going on, which is, of course, the war in Ukraine? Now, this is worrisome on the one hand, and we could maybe bring in other transits here that could lead to a sense of maybe containment, and that is Saturn. Saturn is an Aquarius and therefore is strongly aspecting Aries. And the eclipse here and all the planets here, including an exalted sun. And, the eclipse itself is, though Jupiter is at a kind of on the brink, it's still in Pisces. So, Jupiter is strong in one sense. And Venus is in its own sign on the other side. So there are some mitigating factors here for sure that I'm hope I'm not being too Pollyanna-ish about and too positive about, because Jupiter, what's doing and all of that. But Venus is in Taurus in April, and there is a sweet spot in the year in this month for sure. And Saturn is in its own sign, Aquarius. So you can see Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, all in their own signs, and the sun is exalted. A couple of days after this, the moon is exalted, which I'll talk about. It's a very important day in the year. It's an auspicious day on the 22nd of April when both sun and moon are exalted. Venus is in its own sign, Saturn in its own sign. A highly auspicious day. So all that's good. Saturn is, as well, like I said, is aspecting Aries and the new moon and eclipse. So it could suggest that there's some containment so it doesn't get out of hand, in other words. However, again, I do think this is a trigger for things that sort of happen later on, and we have to be really mindful of that. So take the time on the 20th to be quiet, to settle down in yourself and to set some intentions, and to maybe not take actually any actions around anything on the new moon, but to intend something that you will do, and then do it 2 days later, because 2 days later is the really auspicious day, the 22nd. I'll get to that in a minute. I want to end on a more positive note before I leave this, because I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. So I'm going to end on that 22nd of April. But before then, I just want to show you the total solar eclipse on April 20th at 5 degrees, Sidereal Aries. This is almost exactly where the 1929 eclipse occurred in May 1929. It's a slightly further south. The 1929 one was a bit further north, but it's pretty much over here. Then I want to mention as well, 2 weeks later, we have, even though we're getting into May, you can't really have one without the other. So we can't talk about one eclipse without the other. They come in pairs. So this is now one starting with the new moon. So something new is instigated, something new, maybe even shocking, is brought about. Something happens, something that really shakes things up for the new moon and solar eclipse. And then 2 weeks later, as is always the case, the full moon leads to some resolution around that thing. And of course, that suggests that it's Aries Libra. So it's war and peace. It's selfishness and cooperation and compromise. It's taking action without considering anyone else. That's Aries. And then Libra, considering everyone else. So there has to be a balance between the two. And this is the balancing point and resolution point for this whole thing. So this is a full moon. It's a partial lunar eclipse on May 5th, 20 degrees, Sidereal Libra. Lunar Mansion is Vishaka. It's very much about taking a path, choosing a path and sticking with it. And although that could also suggest that there is this confusion about which path to go, again, because of what Jupiter is doing, once you choose a path, you kind of really just have to go with that. And again, see it from higher on up, and that this is all meant to be. A reminder, this is where all the eclipses are for the year. If you need reminding, that we have the total solar eclipse, April 20th, 5 degrees Aries, partial lunar eclipse, 20 degrees Libra. Make sure, if you know your chart, if there are any planets, any sensitive degrees around these degrees, or opposite, then so up 5 degrees Aries or opposite in Libra, 5 degrees, 20 degrees Libra, 20 degrees Aries, all this region. Later on in the year, we're going to have some interesting eclipses. October This one is really going to be a fascinating one. 26 degrees of Virgo, October 14th, and then 10 degrees of Aries, a lunar on October 28th. I'll talk more about those later on, but again, these are part of the kind of big shakeup financially as well. So one other thing I want to mention is this really complex configuration, I guess you could say, that we're having with Rahu in Aśvinī and Ketu in Swati. Rahu in Aries, Ketu in Libra. Aśvinī and Swati are actually correlated more with their opposite nodes. So Aśvinī is associated with Ketu in the cycles, the planetary cycles I mentioned earlier. And Swati is associated with Rahu. So it's like they're in each other's lunar mansions. And swapping signs like this, star signs, is like this image of the Ouroboros. It's like the serpent devouring its own tail. It kind of leads to these sort of conundrums where, we're stuck in this loop in some way. You might be stuck in some mental loop. We might globally be stuck in some situation we feel like we can't get out of. It's like a conundrum. And of course, that has a lot of meaning in terms of the current war situation, the patterns that are repeating, the mistakes that we continually make. We don't learn from our mistakes in history, of course. We forget that's Ketu, the mistakes of the past, and we keep making those mistakes in the future. That's Rahu. So Rahu now in Aries and Aśvinī, this impulsive, reactive, fiery, sort of explosive lunar mansion, and Ketu and Swati and this lack of, clarity around, negotiation and all of that. And Swati being very scattered in many ways, like Rahu, whereas Aśvinī can be very incisive and, very like cutting in many ways as well, and just decisive and just action orientated and all of that. It's just very complicated in terms of a war dynamic. And it's almost like, again, because of this, adding further complexity and nuance on top of the eclipse itself and the Mercury retrograde, it just is a crucial time where I think cool heads prevail, but we're not likely to see that. I'm reminded of that poem. I think it was Kipling, was it? When all about are losing their heads, it's important at this time to really be mindful of not losing it and being very focused on what is happening, that there are a lot of changes happening underfoot that are very uncertain. And let's add another one in just for good measure. Let's add in Pluto, because Pluto, on top of all of this, is coming into a square, exact square to the nodes, Rahu Ketu, and then stationing retrograde on May 1st. And therefore, all of them together are going to retrograde throughout the rest of the summer, right up until really the late period in the year in October. So that is just adding further complexity, because this is later on in October. They go back from 6 degrees. Pluto is going to station at 6 degrees of Capricorn, move back 5 degrees. Nodes are going to move back 5 degrees with it, then 4 degrees, then 3 degrees. It's like we're in this holding pattern as well with the nodes and Pluto, and we don't see these. Pluto is not visible. It's a subconscious, it's hidden. Rahu Ketu are our shadow. And when they are formed like this in a square, a tense square, but not seen, we just feel this sense of things are shifting around in a sort of unseen way. And we get paranoid maybe, and we get sort of, we feel very uncertain, and things feel very fated and out of control. And this is likely the whole summer. That's how we're going to feel because of these changes when we add this to all the other things that are happening. So it's a highly complex period we're heading into now, folks. April, May. And we need to be really mindful of that. Now, having said all of that, we do have to think about the more positive things. And again, I want to end this video on that note. But before we get there, it's still like we're not out of the woods yet. I do feel like what happens in April, May is leading to this potential market crash by October, November. And we could have, like I said, some major jolts before then. And again, it is all highlighted in the transits. I'm going to go through this for patrons, more detail about the astrology of the similarities between 1929 and this year, and look at right up into that period, October, November. So if you're interested in joining me live and have a discussion about these transits afterwards, you can sign up as a patron. So this is the Akshaya Tritiya. This is the undiminishing third lunar day. Akshaya means undiminished. and 30 is the third lunar day, literally. So it's on April 22nd, 2 days after the eclipse. So that's why I think, again, using the eclipse day on April 20th to make some intentions and to really be still, and then to take whatever action you feel appropriate on April 22nd on the most auspicious day of the year, quote unquote. Because again, the sun is exalted, moving towards its exact degree of exaltation. The moon is exalted by exact degree here in this chart. And we have Jupiter move into Aries. Okay, it's on a cusp and all of that. And Mercury has stationed retrograde. Okay, let's leave that aside. But Venus is in its own sign. Saturn is in its own sign. And Mercury and Mars actually are exchanging signs. So it's this as if they're in their own sign in a way. You know, if you post exchange, put Mars in Aries and Mercury in Gemini. So there's a lot of strengths about this time for sure as well. And I do think we have to take that as a more positive indication of, you know, something out of the blue perhaps happening in April, but then actually there could be some very positive things happening too. So regardless of what's happening in the world though, it's really important to make use of when these kind of sweet spots in the year come along. So to make time for doing something on this day, on April 22nd, to intend something and to start something, especially on April 22nd. Traditionally in India, they do a lot of like buying gold, because again, if it's called undiminishing day, then you're investing in something like that. And I'm not going to get into the whole economic thing here, but obviously the thing with the gold and things that don't lose their value. But just think about anything that you want to do, anything you want to begin that is auspicious, something that you want to grow um, over the years. So that's a good day, April 22nd. Before we finish up, I want to highlight again this Saturn we might forget about Saturn in the background because it might seem that it's gone quiet, but it's not quiet. Saturn is very slowly making its presence felt in Aquarius because it has now moved into Shatabishaj. This is the 100 healers, the faint stars of Shatabishaj lunar mansion. There's no apparent bright star in this lunar mansion star sign in Aquarius. And so that's why Aquarius is all about the collective. It's all about society and everybody. But Saturn, when it's in this sign, it has in the past, it brings in the themes of social issues like civil rights and all of these things are apparent. But one of the things about it though, and that again could be the containment that we hope for. And in a way, because we don't have Jupiter to look to at this time, we have to look to Saturn for hope. So how do you look to Saturn for hope? Well, you need to look at what you have. We need to look at, building something from the ground up. We need to look at grassroots movements and all of that. We need to look at our communities and our families and people around us, our supports, our networks to help contain whatever's going on here. But in another way, Saturn and this lunar mansion Shatabishaj is, because it's ruled by the god of the ocean, Varuna, it's obviously related a lot to storms and water because it's god of the waters. So we're going to see a lot of storm damage. We're going to see a lot of water issues. We're seeing that already. Saturn has already moved in here, and that's going to continue to be the case. And this is just kind of adding to the situation in one way. So we need to be mindful of that as well. If you know this level of astrology, if you're a Vedic astrologer or follow the system, there's another way you can read all of this, of course, and that's from your moon sign. So, quote unquote, moon sign is your lunar mansion. There are 27 of them. We divide up the zodiac 27 times of 13 degrees, 20 minutes. And these three are in 3 groups of 9 and relate to the 9 planets, which I'll show you now. So depending on where the moon is or was when you were born, what lunar mansion it was in, Saturn in, for example, Shatabishaj will have a particular quality based on its position from your moon. Not from your rising sign, but from your moon sign. You can do it from rising sign, but it's helpful to start with the moon itself. So the 1st, 10th, and 19th star signs represent like a beginning and a restart in many ways. So if Saturn is in the 1st, 10th, or 19th from your moon sign, then it's like a new beginning. 2nd, 11th, and 20th, that's the second growth phase. 3rd, 12th, 21st, that's the pausing phase. 4th, 13th, 22nd, it's the securing phase. 5th, 14th, 23rd is the work phase or challenge phase even. 6th, 15th, 24th is the attainment phase after the hard work. 7th, 16th, 25th is the changing direction phase. 8th, 17th, 26th is the befriending phase, the supportive phase, and 19th, 18th, and the last one, 27th, is the connection or even more deeply a spiritual connection phase. And so this is how they line up with the planets. So you have Ketu, the South Node, Venus, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury. These are the cycles of Vedic astrology. And they're based on all of these lunar mansions. All planets have 3 each. So depending now, if you know where your moon is, you look at where your moon is and you count from your moon to where Saturn is, for example, in Shadabishaj. You can do it for all planets, of course, but Saturn is a slower mover, so it might be good to start there. So Saturn currently is in Shadabishaj. So if you know where your moon is, you count from there. So for example, if you have your moon in Uttara Falguni, for example, and that's related to the sun. So you count from the sun to Rahu. That's sun inclusively, sun 1, moon 2, Mars 3, Rahu 4. So that's 4. So for someone with the sun in Uttara Falguni, then Saturn in Shadabishaj relates to this 4th, and it's all about security. So you can do the same for yours. You can pause the video if you're not familiar, and then go off and find your lunar mansion and see if you can calculate that for yourself. Okay, and I know that's a bit of a deeper layer, but if you're interested in going there, you can become a patron and we can go into these in more detail. You can get your timeline report, the cycles I mentioned. I do monthly forecast meetings as well. We join and have a discussion about these transits every month. And you can also access the Scorpio Video Club, I call it. So this is where I share some of the secrets of Indian astrology, the more predictive Vedic Indian astrology. So you can go to patreon.com/timeline astrology, or just go to timelineastrology.com. That's my website. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please click the like button. If you have any questions or any thoughts about the transits for April, please leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll be bringing out more content, monthly forecasts, sign-based forecasts as well. So keep an eye out for that. So subscribe. Thanks again for watching. I wish you all the very best for the month of April, and until next time.